Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 9th of April and you're joined by myself, Philip Northard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. This is episode 17, season 8 of Motor Trade Radio, bringing you all the chatter that matters. And once again, we've gathered together this week's big car retailing stories across the franchised and independent sectors for you to enjoy all in one place, on demand, on your podcast feed.
Well, take a seat, get a coffee, whatever you're drinking, because this is a packed show today. We've got a lot to get through this morning, haven't we, Curtis? We've got a lot of headlines, especially with the new car registration results being out this week. But we have got a few shout-outs before we get into that as well.
Yeah, so first shout-out is many thanks to eBay Motors Group, who sponsor the show, for an exclusive sneak preview of their March market view. And this highlights all the used car trends from across the franchised, independent and supermarket sectors. So we'll be taking a deep dive into that. The market view will actually be published on Monday, so you are getting this in advance.
Yeah, and we must continue to give a shout out to what is proving to be a phenomenal downloaded podcast interview with Caroline Bonnell, who was the winner of the Barbercock's Women of the Year award earlier this. It was March now, wasn't it? Actually, I was thinking earlier this month, but it was actually last month. It was and Caroline's the head of comms and marketing at E-Star Vans and Trucks, but again, still available for download, as is all the other great interviews that we've had on the podcast. But do head over to that because it's a fantastic interview there with Caroline, and she's very comfortable in chatting with Curtis and I as well, won't she?
Yeah, and we'll have to invite her back sometime because, it was a great chat. So, as we say every week, if you'd like to get in touch with us or send us a press release or come on the show, then just email us at motortraderadio@yahoo.com. You can also join our LinkedIn group or follow us on Twitter.
So, do you want to run through the headlines first, or shall we get straight into them today, Curtis?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick roundup of the headlines. So headlines this week are from AM, Car Dealer, Motor Trader, the Financial Times, and This Is Money. And it's a bit of a thematic podcast this week, Phil, because we'll be looking at March in terms of the new and used car market trends. And we'll also be looking at financials. So we've got the latest year ends from Cazoo, Swansway and Lookers. And we'll close off this episode with a farewell to a British legend.
Yeah, so we better get into the new vehicle registrations that came out earlier this week, and not the best of reading, but I know that we've been a challenging month to say the least. But we're going to have AM Online on this one, and it says that the lowest March new car registrations since 1998 lay bare the challenges ahead. So obviously there with the SMMT talking about obviously the supply constraints that we've got continuing in new vehicle supply, but also that sort of drop in consumer confidence that has hit the sector as well. But actually the private registrations turned out pretty well compared to last year, though. It was fleet and business that has performed terrible this time.
Yeah, and it's worth putting some context around 1998 because that was before the twice yearly plate change was introduced. So the March markets back then wasn't that big, whereas we've now dropped below that level. So it just shows the position the market is in at the moment. So new car registrations for the month fell 14.3% to just over 243,000 units, and it was actually the best ever month for battery electric vehicles. So despite the drop in the market, BEVs were up 78.7% to just over 39,000 units, while if you combine all electrified vehicles, so plug-in hybrids and hybrids, they accounted for 1 in 3 registrations over the course of the month. And looking at Q1, because of course March rounds off Q1, the market actually dropped 1.9%. And again, giving that a bit of context, if we look back to Q1 last year, that was still distorted by lockdown rules and regs. So we have actually dropped below, even though dealerships are obviously up and running and open.
Yeah, it's been three tough Marches now. I mean, as you say there, Curtis, I mean, March 2020 was when the pandemic hit in the back part of the month in the UK. That dropped the March market down to 483,000, which was a 31% down drop from the first quarter of the previous year of 701,000. So to put context with that, back in 2017, the first quarter we did 820,000 compared to 417,000 the first quarter of this year. So it's, as we always say this, don't we, it's very difficult looking month on month, year on year at the minute with some of the challenges we've been facing over the last 2 or 3 years in the sector. So again, a very challenging marketplace. There is a view that some of this market will happen in April that didn't happen in March. There was a lot of registrations that, because of delays through the logistics and distribution network, in particular through Europe at the minute, that there was vehicles that were meant to land in March that haven't done, and those are suspected to land in April. So it'll be interesting to see what April does turn out like, because last year we did 141,000 compared to 161,000 back in 2019 for April. So we might see a fairly reasonable April, all things considered, but there's still a lot of people waiting for their new cars, I think, Curtis.
Yeah, definitely. And you made a good point earlier about private demand being strong, relatively strong. So certainly compared with fleet and business, so private accounted for 56.4% of registrations over the course of March. And that was actually up 8.2%, whilst fleets were accounted for 40.8%. That was down a massive 34.4%, whilst business registrations took a 2.8% market share, and that was up 20%.
And just before we move on to the LCV market, just to give you a little bit of context of what's been happening across the European market as well. So Germany finished on 241,000 registrations, down 17.5% on the same period last year for March. Italy were down, finished on 119,000, that was 29.7% down year on year. Then you've also got Spain down to 59,900. They were down 30.2% compared to last year, and France at 147,000, down 19.5% compared to that same March of last year. So very challenging market right across Europe there, but there have been some increases in some markets, but even the US dropped significantly year on year. So the US were down to 1.2 million in March, but that was a 22.2% drop year on year. So that's in terms of volume, that's a significant drop in numbers there for the US.
Yeah, definitely. And whilst we're still on the car market, before we head over to LCVs, it's worth looking, I think, at the top 5 best performers in March, because there's a real change and churn within the top sellers. So the 5th most popular car for the month was the Hyundai Tucson. Number 4, Nissan Qashqai. Number 3, Vauxhall Corsa. Number 2, the Tesla Model 3, and number 1, the Tesla Model Y. So Tesla taking the first and second slots there, and no Ford vehicles in the top 5. In fact, you've got to go down to 10th place to find the Ford Fiesta, which we would normally expect to see at the top of that particular chart.
Yeah, well, Ford are down 19.8% year on year for the month of March, and down 17.56% year to date for the first quarter of the year. So a bit of struggling there. But I mean, we were chatting just before the show about obviously some of these year on year performances, and I mentioned about MG. And MG had registered a significant number. So back in 2021, in March. They registered just sort of 4,000. March of this year, just over 9,000. So they've seen a 136% increase in registrations. But you had an interesting start about the year to date, didn't you?
Yeah, I've got a fun fact about MG, which, funnily enough, they did press release. So MG sold more cars in Q1 of this year than they did over the whole of 2019. And they actually sold more in March. So, last month, they sold more vehicles than they did over the course of 2018. So it's not all gloom and doom. And AMG are finding themselves in that sweet spot of having affordable EVs to sell, to bring to market at a time when customers, buyers are actually looking at transitioning.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So if we talk about LCVs now, because it's great. I mean, again, I always say it, but it's great that LCV now is getting a bit more coverage in the trade media than it had previously. So the Motor Trader is reporting that LCV market declined by 27.6% in March. BEVs actually were up 17.7% year on year. So again, the EV sector for the LCV is showing some positivity there, even in the LCV sector.
Yeah, although having said that, registrations for large vans were down 19%, while demand for medium-sized vans, so that's the second biggest segment by volume, fell 27.6%. So if we look at Q1 as a whole, that was down 27.6%, which is actually below pre-pandemic levels now. And this is attributed by the SMMT to the global shortage of semiconductors and the effect that's still having on supply.
Yeah, and just before we head over to our next story, we'll we with the Autofocus, which is our fifth issue of Autofocus that I produce on a quarterly basis. That will be due out hopefully next week, so do keep a lookout for that. And that's where we'll be forecasting where we expect to see the new and used vehicle market and van market for the next quarter in Q2 and Q3 and the full year. So a little bit more there, and some great editorial contributions again this month from Grant Thornton, ICDP and Regit this month have all contributed to this quarter's Autofocus. So keep a lookout for that. You might see it in my social channels when it comes live, but we'll see.
Have you got any social channels then?
Yeah, I think I do a couple of bits there, Curtis, yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned this right at the start in terms of the shout out. So we have got an exclusive from eBay Motors Group. So this is the market view that they produce on a monthly basis. And as you say there, Curtis, looking at franchised, independent and supermarket data that comes out of Motors there. And again, as always, far too much detail for us to go into today in all of it, but we'll try and give you some headlines from it, and we'll always advise you to look it up and go and look at it in detail. So it's some fascinating stats in there from eBay Motors Group.
Yeah, and many thanks to the team at eBay Motors Group for sharing this with us ahead of it being issued on Monday. So March's used car market showed further signs of stability, which eBay Motors Group was reporting in for February as well, with minimal monthly fluctuations in advertised prices, stock volumes and days to sell. So they really are the three main criteria that they look at across those sectors that you mentioned: franchised, independent and car supermarkets. So that slight downward movement of prices that we've been talking about in the wholesale arena continued for the second consecutive month in the retail sector, with the overall average dipping 1.1% month on month to £17,636. So that's a drop of £189. The biggest average shortfalls were felt by supermarkets, where prices were down 1.7%, which equated to £306, followed by franchise dealers, which were down 1.2% or £257. But if you look at the independent sector, they actually saw a marginal increase of 0.1%, equating to £19. So a strong showing there for independents.
Yeah, and interesting in terms of the stock volumes as well across the three. That car supermarkets look like it's creeping up slightly. I mean, back in March of 21, average was 336. That's dropped to 308 in February of 2022, but actually gone back up to 322 on average in March of this year. Franchise dealerships on average 62 cars in stock in March of 2021. That dropped to 58 in February of 22, but then it stayed fairly stable at 57 in March of this year. And then for independents, fairly stable right across the three there. So average 37 cars in stock back in March of 2021, 34 in February of this year, but actually risen marginally to average of 35 in March of this year. So, fairly stable, but it looks like there's a little bit of sign of stock returning to the market there, Curtis.
Yeah, and the third criteria, days to sell. So demand remained steady in March, with those days to sell just 0.2% lower than February at an average of 43.4 days. However, supermarkets, despite the increased stock and price drops that we've talked about, saw cars average 3.1 days longer in stock than in February. Franchise dealers, they remained unchanged month on month at 42 days, and independents again saw a slight improvement from 49.1 days to 48.2 days, which I think we can effectively say it's a day better in March than it was in February.
Yeah.
And there's a comment from Dermot Keller, her head of marketing and research at eBay Motors Group, who says a stable used car market was a welcome trend for dealers in March, especially against a backdrop of a 14.3% drop in new car registrations during the all-important plate change month.
And just before we go, just there that I say right at the start, lots of information in here, right? Say for the franchise, independent, and supermarkets there. So all up with the top 5 price movers by fuel type. All demand metrics are in there as well. So again, like I say, we won't got time to share everything in this report. So do head over to eBay Motors Group, and you'll be able to see that for yourself. And as I say, the press release should be out in the market on Monday coming.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed. And now, Phil, we've got some financial results.
We have just a few, yeah. So
yes,
if you've not seen it this week, Kazoo have reported their results for the last financial year, I think it is, isn't it, Curtis?
It is, yeah. For the year ending December 31st, 2021.
That's it. So the car dealer have covered the story on this one. So Kazoo reports 180 million loss in 2021, despite revenue increasing by more than 300% to 668 million. Those are staggering numbers, aren't they, Curtis?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Both ways. But I think, this is obviously being chatted through the social channels this week in terms of that performance. They're talking about that 180 million loss adjusted for EBITDA there. But, I think there's been a lot of focus on the profit per unit, hasn't there, in this one, that it said that it increased per unit across the year to £427 per unit, although this did add up in Q4 to a £233 per unit. So again, very much looking at the analysis on this one, Curtis, aren't they, in terms of these results from Kazoo?
Yeah, I was particularly interested in that gross profit per unit. So, as you say, for the year, it tracked at £427, which compared to a loss of £229 in the previous year. But and we were talking about this before the show. That's against an industry average, which is around the 2,000, just under the
today. Yeah, yeah,
£2,000 mark, isn't it? And interestingly, and we'll look at this in a few minutes. Lookers posted, in their full years, their gross profit per unit was £2,300. So that was the average across the year. So there's quite a discrepancy there.
yeah. And I say there's lots of debates taking place across the social channels on this, and there's a view that they are still building a brand. They're still building their business. We're still kind of, in all accounts, we're still early days, aren't we,
Yeah.
of Kazoo at the minute. I know, like I say, you on the interview, one of the contributors on that interview that Car Dealer did the other week. But again, Alex is very clear that they are building a business. A lot of volume, a lot of turnover there from the business. But they're saying that Alex is quoted in the story saying that during 2021 we made some important strategic progress creating further moats around our business in the UK. We bought our vehicle reconditioning in-house well ahead of schedule, a challenging process but one which has significant long-term advantages. So they are looking at these long-term strategies now.
Yeah.
And again, as you said earlier, Curtis, they've, albeit that profit per unit 427 compared to the industry average and what we're going to talk about shortly from Lookers, it's still a £627 increase compared to the previous year performance. So it's going in the right direction, albeit not quite at the average industry standards as quite yet.
Yeah, you're right, and that they've actually set the benchmark for the next financial year, so the current financial year 2022, because they're targeting £900 per unit. So we'll see how they get on with that. But within the results, they do shed light on the volumes that they actually sold. So over the course of last year, Kazoo sold 49,853 cars. It said it was on target, and it says it also plans to. It's on target. Those figures were on target and saw a tripling of the volumes that it did as recently as 2020, when it sold just shy of 15,000 cars. And it's also worth mentioning that over the course of last year, Kazoo did make some significant acquisitions in terms of Swipe Car, Brum Brum, and Kazana, and they also launched in Spain and Italy.
Yeah, busy boys,
Yeah.
definitely. But this week they have been covered on the Watchdog. Interestingly enough, which AM have covered the story on this, saying that BBC Watchdog investigation calls Kazoo's 300-point check into question. Now I've not had a chance to watch the Watchdog interview yet, but they do talk about obviously that this 300-point check. I think you were saying that there's a view that the customers don't get to see that.
Yeah, I did watch it, although I must admit, I went onto iPlayer as soon as I read this story because I thought I wanted to see that. And I was tapping in Watchdog, I was trying to find Watchdog, but it didn't show up because it was actually part of the One Show, which is
Yeah.
it's a program I must admit I've never actually seen before. So I had to fast forward through the One Show to actually find the piece on Kazoo, and I do urge you to have a look because it is very, very interesting. It's quite enlightening. They talk to 3 or 4 customers who had bought vehicles. Each of these vehicles had a fault, and Kazoo actually rectified the faults and did compensate them. And in one instance, they actually swapped one of the cars because of the nature of the fault. It was a MX-5 that they swapped out. But the point that was made by all the customers was that they wanted to see the 300-point check, but they hadn't actually been shown it. So this is really what has made the press this week in terms of the coverage from AM and others. It's that visibility, the transparency of the 300-point check.
Yeah, they say. I mean, it's a comprehensive check by the sounds of it, isn't it? That 300-point check compared to others that he's quoted, obviously talking about this 75 multi-point check, and I've been involved with 120-point checks, and like you say, I mean they're fairly comprehensive what they do go through in that vehicle. I suppose the question is that clearly, from all accounts, they sorted out those complaint customers as well, didn't they, on the show?
Yeah, it's just curious that they don't hand over the 300-point checks. What has actually been covered by
Yeah,
it.
and I suppose if any listeners tuning in this morning, do you hand over your 120, 75 or whatever point check to the customer? Is that part of the handover package that you do give customers on collection of their used car? We'd glad to know if you can
I
send
can
in.
feel a LinkedIn discussion coming on, can't you?
Yeah, we might regret that, but we'll
Yeah.
see what comes from that. But
Well, there's a challenge from both of us. If you do, then let us know on LinkedIn, and if you don't, let us know.
yeah, let's see what happens with this one. So again, heading over now to staying with AM online, but heading over to a friend of the podcast actually, and Peter Smythe has been on Car Dealer as well, chatting about the disruptors in the market. But fantastic results here from Swansway Motor Group. They're saying that directors staggered by 147% profit growth in 2021. So hats off to these guys. I mean, what a performance throughout 2021 there. We had both Peter and John on the podcast, the Smythe brothers, talking through how they run the fantastic interview on it. I never expect anything less from those guys. But, great performance this. And, they're talking about the year ending December 2021 as it generated 17.7% increase in turnover to 838 million and a profit before tax of 25.2 million from a 25 new and used car dealership group. So, again, fantastic performance there, Curtis.
Yeah, and a great quote from Peter Smythe in this piece that AM have run. He says, it's an awesome result, and goes on to say, if I'm being perfectly honest, we were staggered by it. And he says the really encouraging part of it is the start that we've made to this year too. In Q1, we've already made £7 million, so off to a strong start in Q1 this year. But they're great results. They really are. And also within the piece, it is mentioned that the results include the repayment of over £314,000 in coronavirus job retention scheme payments, which had been claimed last year. And it also digs down into some of the sales. So across retail and fleet, Swansway's new car sales rose 17% to just over 19,000 units, while used car volumes rose by 24.6% to just over 16,000 units during the same period. So in the year, it also expanded its used car motor match division with the addition of a sixth site, and sales were up there by 90%. That's 90%, with profitability up 154%. So no wonder they're pleased with these results, Phil.
Yeah, and you say, I mean, it's worth heading over to the story there, because they do intimate that they thought there about BMW, Porsche, or Toyota would be welcome additions to this Swansway portfolio, as Peter's quoted there, to add to their. I think they've got Citroen, Honda, JLR, Peugeot, VW and VW commercial vehicles there. So obviously intimating there that they're probably potentially on the plan for a bit of expansion, looking at spending some of that retention, that money they've earned in 2021 there, I suspect, Curtis.
Yeah, definitely. And also worth mentioning that they celebrate their 20th anniversary next year. And they've actually just launched a rather eye-catching new corporate identity. So that includes a new logo and also a new trading name, which is now Swansway Motor Group. But the logo is pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. John, I think Peter said that it's in the shape of a swan. So the S is for obviously Swansway, and a swan, and then the bottom half of the swan looks like a G for the group. So someone's been very, very creative there, and like you say, perfect time for them to do a little bit of rebranding, a little bit of sort of, as you say, their Curtis corporate identity on the back of what has been a superb year for these guys.
Yeah, and staying with Swansway, because Motor Trader picked up quite an interesting angle from the results and went in with the headline, Swansway pushes hard on digital to combat disruptors. So this actually echoes what Peter Smythe was saying in that video interview you mentioned on car dealers. So across its website over the course of last year, Swansway saw a 65% increase in visits, and that resulted in a 70% increase in the volume of online leads. So it is focusing more than ever on that online space, and obviously investing in its online platforms and keeping a pace with the disruptors, which we all know about. And their argument there at Swansway is that yes, we're a traditional franchise dealer group, but we do have a strong online presence, and that's reflected in these figures, because there's some impressive business there being driven through its website.
Definitely, and he was very clear with that on his messaging, Monty, on the interview, that whether they've got some work to do or not, but say they are a well-known business in their local areas and online, and I think the figures are a testament to that result as well. So sticking with profit and Lookers, AM Online. So welcome back, Lookers. What
Yes.
a fantastic result there. So torrid a few years for Lookers in the pre-pandemic there, but Mark Rayban, chief exec, is pulling out fantastic results now. So Lookers posts record pre-tax profit result of 90 million. And this is, for I think it's for the year ending 2021, again, end of December.
It is,
December.
December.
So they're talking about, showed a revenue of 4.05 billion, and that was a 9% increase compared to 2020. So again, fantastic performance there coming out of Lookers for their year ending 2021.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been difficult to have predicted this headline 2 years ago, and it just shows what a remarkable turnaround the business has had over the course of the last 2 years, with Mark Ruban at the helm. They've got a new management team, new board, and over the course of those 2 years, it shed something like 27 retail sites, and obviously went through that fraud probe, which identified a £19 million black hole in the accounts, and saw it delisting temporarily from the stock exchange. So they have bounced back, and profits have taken a big leap year on year from the 13.7 million that it posted in 2020, and it is attributing a lot of the turnaround to going back to what we were saying earlier, used car margins, and its continued focus on cost control. So Swansway is saying it made a strong start to Q1, despite this ongoing new car supply, the constraints due to the chip shortage, and it's saying that it will add to its 11 standalone used car centres, and that will include 2 Lookers Cube concepts, which are these big 5-acre sites, and they'll be rolling those 2 sites out in this year and next year. So lots going on there at Lookers.
Yeah, and like you say, the highlights are probably the used and after sales performance there, because they do talk about the margin per unit on used increased by 54% in the first half of the year and 45% in the second half of the year. So that gave them an overall year of 44% increase in profit per unit, margin per unit. And then they talk about after sales as well. So they're talking about after sales represented 35.3%. albeit 2020 was 40% of the group's total gross profit. On a like-for-like basis, after-sales revenues increased by 14.5% compared to that in the year prior, 2020. So, again, showing that they're making some fantastic margin through that used and after-sales market at the minute.
Yeah, and we also looked at the Financial Times' coverage of this story, because they've really gone in on the used car side of the business, and the headline at the FT is Lookers says used car prices to remain high this year. And this is really based on some comments that Mark Robin has given them in the interview, saying that he does not expect values to drop off a cliff, which really does echo what our conversation recently with Darren Martin, where he was talking about the March values in the market and his predictions over the coming weeks, and that sort of stability. We are going to see some downward movement, but it's not from the edge of a cliff.
No, and I think that's where we've got to keep that message going out into the market there, and for investors into the sector as well, that that we might see an easing of values through the challenges ahead in terms of that consumer confidence and what's happening in the world of cost of living. But there's very much still lots of strength there. There is still demand there. There's still no tsunami of product on the horizon quite yet. So we may see an easing, but it's clearly from an easing from a very high point. I think we've got to always remember where the used values are today. And I don't know whether you've still got your Sephiras there on your forecourt, Curtis, but just remember where they came from. But yeah, so again, good message in there, and it's great to see these guys being quoted in places like the Financial Times as well as getting that message out there of performance. So well done to the Lookers management team there.
And finally this week, we go to This Is Money, and the headline there is End of the Road for Vauxhall's British-built family car. And this is the Astra. It's the end of the road for the Astra. So the last Astra rolled off the production line, I guess it must have been over the course of this week. So it was a hot red estate with a petrol engine. And Ellesmere Port, has been active for 60 years. It opened in 1962 and has been the centre of Astra production since then. And yes, an amazing facility. They've produced 4 million units since then, and really has gone from strength to strength. But the plant will be repurposed for Stellantis production of electric vans, new generation electric vans. And I guess what's going to be interesting about this is that they will come out of the Ellesmere Port plants with Vauxhall badges, Citroën badges, and Peugeot badges, and we'll also see some MPV spin-offs, and this will be from 2023, so not that far off.
No, I mean, all right, it's bad news in terms of that, the sort of last of the Vauxhall Astra coming out of Ellesmere Port, but it's good news because there was that period where we weren't so sher whether it was going to stay or go, and that's sort of continuing with you feel for the employees down there at Ellesmere Port, don't you? I mean, they were continuing whether there was a future there for Ellesmere Port or not. Clearly there is. Clearly, there's a lot of investment gone in there with 100 million investment into the plant there, and it's got a future now and a very clear future. And so great news for those guys down there. I wonder who's got the that Astra then. I wonder where that's going to end up in that the SRI nav manual in hot red paint. So we'll see where that turns up as to whether it goes into some collection somewhere as the last vehicle out of Ellesmere Port.
Yeah, but that's all 7 generations have been built there since 1981. So it's a great legacy there. I actually went to Ellesmere Port probably about 5 or 6 years ago. So it would have been the last but one generation that was launched, and Vauxhall organised a big PR launch from the plant. And the idea was you went to the plant, you had a tour, and you actually drove the car off the line into it was amazing route into North Wales. But it was fascinating seeing the plant because it was getting on by then, but inside it was absolutely top notch. It was a very, very modern facility.
Yeah, and I would say head over to that story on This Is Money, because they've done a nice collection of the evolution of the Astra outside images there, outside Ellesmere Port. There's a video as well in there with an Astra SR 1.6 SR being finished off. I'm not sure which. Oh, that's it. So that's one of the first ones back in 1981 there, Curtis. There as a video. Yeah. So head over to the story, a bit of nostalgia there.
You know what, Phil? I'm a bit alarmed by how old that photograph looks. 1981. I remember 1981.
We feel old. I know.
Did we really look like that?
It's not good, is it?
Well, you were still in short trousers.
I was. Yeah, I'd be 10. Yeah, not too bad then. But I'm trying to think if my dad had one actually. But so I head over there. But yeah, so a lot of headlines this week. We didn't cover everything, but there's a lot going on. So as I say, a lot of detail in those new vehicle performances there for the month of March. Unfortunately, it doesn't put context in it looking at year on year. Again, a lot of data there coming out of eBay Motors Group on the franchise, independent and supermarket sectors as well. So have a look at what's going on there. It might help you make some decisions on what to buy and what to sell, etc. So head over there. But head over to some of those financials as well. Some great performances there, particularly from Swansway and Lookers. So jam-packed headlines there, Curtis.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's all for this week. So you've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us for all the chatter that matters. We're back again next week. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.